Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Wednesday. This is part one of our video lecture for Wednesday. Today is quiz day, so make sure you're logging in. Make sure you're taking your part one vocab quiz. 11 questions. You get one time to take it. Unlimited time, so make sure you're getting that done today for me. All right? So we're going to continue through our video lecture today, and we're going to be talking about some specific incidents that happened when it comes to the fight during the civil rights movement for equality and for integration. The first one that we're going to talk about today are the Freedom Riders, and they start facing violence. And violence is going to be something that's going to be like a common theme that we're going to continue to see over the next few slides when it comes to resistance against the civil rights movement. So in 1960, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation in interstate transport was illegal. So you couldn't tell people that if they're moving or going from New York to Texas, that all of a sudden they pass into a southern state, that they have to segregate. They no longer can sit where they sit on the bus. They have to move somewhere else. That's illegal. You can't do that. All right? And so the Supreme Court rules in favor of integration through the bus system from state to state, because state-to-state commerce is run by the federal government. They're in control of this. So Freedom Rides were to test whether southern states were complying with the ruling. So these white Northerners and African Americans would take these Freedom Rides, and they would go through the South to see if they would be stopped and if they would be segregated. Because if they were, then they would report this back to the federal government, and the federal government would then get involved and they would step in. So it's a way to test whether or not the laws are actually being followed, what the government's saying, whether that's actually being enforced. On May 4th, 1961, 7 African Americans and 6 whites boarded 2 buses in Washington, D.C. They were headed south to Houston, Texas, but they don't reach their final destination. They get stopped in Anniston, Alabama. Obviously, Alabama being a major segregated state in the South and one that has deep-held Southern tradition. The buses were mobbed and firebombed, and the riders were taken off and beaten. So obviously, in Anniston, Alabama, they're not following the Supreme Court ruling of free transportation between states, and they're not enforcing the laws there. Robert Kennedy, the brother of John F. Kennedy, sent in federal troops to help transport the riders all the way to Houston, Texas. So imagine this. After this event, the federal government's going to show that they're more powerful. So he's going to send the military to ride along beside this bus carrying African-American and white riders. So you have tanks, you have troop transports surrounding this bus, carrying them into Houston. So imagine being someone in Houston who has no idea what's happened in Anniston, Alabama, what's happening in Mississippi to these riders, and all of a sudden you see tanks rolling in front and beside this bus. And you're like, must be some pretty important people on that bus. It's just to show the force, to show who's actually in charge. And the people that are actually in charge is our federal government. And Robert Kennedy and his brother John F. Kennedy, who are big civil rights activists, are trying to show that through authority, through power. All right? In the next slide, you can see the image of these Freedom Riders. Their Greyhound bus that was attacked and firebombed. So a car drove up next to it, busted out the window with a brick. They threw in Molotov cocktails. They would explode. The bus would fill with smoke. Now, the explosion isn't meant to kill the riders. The explosion is meant to get the riders out of the bus, to have the bus stop and pull over. Because once it stops and pulls over, then the advantage goes to the aggressors, the Ku Klux Klan members, the whites in the South. Because now that these riders are off the bus, they're going to influence them. They're going to beat them up. They're going to do terrible things to them. And it doesn't matter if you're white or African Americans. They looked at white Northerners who helped African Americans as being equally bad to the African Americans, because they couldn't understand why they would go against what these white Southerners were doing. So there was a lot of resentment, a lot of hatred towards white Northerners who helped the African Americans. Next, taking aim at the nation's most segregated city. Again, going back down into the Deep South, into Alabama, Birmingham. All right, Birmingham was an extremely segregated city, a city that was deep-rooted in racist ideology, and had a lot of background in the Ku Klux Klan. All right, Birmingham experienced segregation in nearly every aspect of public life, whether that's schools, public transportation, restrooms, restaurants. Segregation's everywhere. All right, you're going to be able to see it. The city itself is divided. There's a white part of society. There's a minority part of society, an area in which only African Americans live. So de facto and de jure segregation are present in Birmingham, Alabama. Between 1956 and 1963, there were 18 unsolved bombings. Now, I don't think local law enforcement was really searching too hard for the bombers. Do you? Probably not, because a lot of the people that were probably causing these were obviously the Ku Klux Klan. And a lot of these people that were doing the bombings were prominent members of society, people that might have even been on the police force in Birmingham, Alabama. So if you're an investigator and you work for the law enforcement, you're probably not going to investigate too hard a bombing that you're implicated in because you don't want to go to prison. So a lot of these just go unsolved, or they're just, hey, there's not enough evidence. Everything goes cold. There's no leads. But in actuality, they know who did it because they took part in it. All right. Attempts to explode dynamite at 2 Jewish synagogues happened as well. This is where we talked about the integration of the swastika into the Ku Klux Klan and the anti-Semitism that the Ku Klux Klan was also bringing in. Why? Because they wanted more members. They wanted their membership to grow not just against African Americans, but against people of different races and obviously of Jewish descent. They planned a series of nonviolent actions against segregation. Groups such as CORE did and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. took full aim at Birmingham, especially after his success in Montgomery with the bus boycott. If he can defeat segregation in Birmingham, then you can defeat segregation anywhere, because it is so deep-rooted that if you have any type of success, then other cities and other states are going to look at this and they're going to say, they're on to something. Hey, man, times are really changing. Let's get with it. Because look what Birmingham did. Look how Birmingham changed. And actually in Birmingham is one of the largest civil rights museums in the nation because of everything that happened there. So the nation watches in horror. The SCLC decided to turn to children for the protest. And that's smart, because if our protests use children, people tend to care more what happens to children. They're more sympathetic to children. And they're not using them as like martyrs or anything like that, but they're using children to get the message out. Think of commercials that show poverty, like we talked about last unit. You see children because they're going to get more money donated towards them, because people feel bad for kids that are put in bad situations. So these children are going to use to protest. 1,000 children marched on Birmingham. Now, they marched with adults too. It's not like it was just children, but you see the children at the forefront. These are the people that the newspaper is going to be taking pictures of, that the nightly news is going to show every day. And so people are going to see these children. They're going to show them fighting against inequality. In May, the children tried to march again. This time, though, they were met, and they were locked inside of a church. The police used attack dogs and high-pressure fire hoses on them. And the images in newspapers and on television shocked most Americans of what was happening to children. Again, not an adult. If it's an adult to an adult situation, a lot of times you don't have that feeling of guilt or resentment. People will look at it and say, well, they're two grown adults. They should work together. They should compromise. They should figure this out. But when it's an adult attacking a child, that child's defenseless in this situation. This child cannot help themselves. They're obviously outmanned, outstrength. They don't have the strength that the adult does. So people are more sympathetic to their cause. The images in the newspapers and television shocked Americans, and most are unaware of what's going on in the South. And this is really going to be an eye-opening experience. And you're going to see here an image in a minute that is going to circulate throughout the United States of children being attacked, not only by their white counterparts, but by local law enforcement. So it's going to be something that is going to be resented by a lot of people in the community. National attention they attracted marked a turning point in Birmingham. As the nation starts to watch what's happening, they start to form an opinion. And that opinion is not very kind of what's going on for the whites in Birmingham. It's going to be more sympathetic to the African Americans. Not everyone liked Birmingham agreeing to desegregate. Eventually, the governor of Birmingham has to make a decision. He has to make a decision in Alabama whether to allow integration to happen and allow Birmingham to stand. If not, Birmingham's going to fall. It's going to crumble because fighting's going to take place. The whole city is going to collapse on itself. And so the governor of Alabama dictates to Birmingham that they need to desegregate. The Ku Klux Klan is not in favor of this. Obviously, they feel like they've lost like one of their largest cities, one of their largest backing areas. The KKK held a rally, and bombs later went off at a motel where black leaders have been staying. And so Kennedy decides to send in the federal troops because he feels like this situation is destabilizing. That all of a sudden it's going to become another war zone, all right? And he doesn't want that to happen. He wants to make sure everything maintains as is, it stays desegregated, and they don't go back to segregation. On September 15th at a Sunday service, a bomb exploded at the 16th Street Baptist Church, killing 4 African-American girls. And at this point, people realize, what is happening? What are we allowing to go on? Why are we allowing people to get away with these heinous acts and killing children in an area that's supposed to be sacred, a church? And the people who did this bombing got very light sentencing because obviously their jury and their judge was also white. But they said, well, we didn't expect anyone to be at the church. It was after service hours, so these girls shouldn't have been there. We were just trying to send a message to the community. Well, when they were trying to send this message, 4 innocent young girls were killed. Public perception now is going to be very anti-Southern white, anti-Ku Klux Klan, and that message is going to spread throughout the United States, even into places like Washington, D.C., into Congress. So here we have the slide that I was talking about, I referenced earlier. You have 2 police officers with their German Shepherd dogs trying to hold the protesters back, but you see this police officer grabbing the protester, this African-American who doesn't have a gun, he doesn't have a bomb in his hand, he's dressed nice, and he's holding him and allowing his dog to attack him, his German Shepherd to attack him. The African-American's not threatening the police officer, he's not resisting the police officer. The police officer's in total control, yet he's allowing this situation to occur. And when this photo gets circulated in the newspapers, people realize, oh my gosh, what's going on? Even the local law enforcement is biased, and they're racist, and they're trying to hinder the efforts of the civil rights movement. And this is when things really begin to change. We start to see a shift in a positive way for the civil rights movement. Even though they're enduring a lot of hatred, a lot of hate, a lot of death, you're starting to see the trend being more positive, the way people feel towards what is happening for civil rights. Okay? That's part 1. I'll come back here in a second with part 2. All right? Hang in, grab a snack, go outside, get some rays, relax, run a lap around your yard, get yourself ready to go for part 2. All right? Be right back.